Thank you for having me.
You're welcome.
I went to college not far from here. I went to the University of Miami. Back before there was airplanes and things like that. And I have to say that the weather, as using the expression I just sort of kicked my ass. It was a tough 3 years. I'm going to read from I Am That Sidney Poitier. I never knew that until I published this book that I wrote satire. People then told me that it was satire, so I accept that it is, though I'm not sure what I'm sad about. So it's maybe a satire of satire. But I'm starting at the beginning, so I shouldn't have to say anything, right? Here it is. I am the ill-starred fruit of a hysterical pregnancy, and surprisingly, odd though I might be, I am not hysterical myself. I'm rather calm, in fact, some might say waveless. I am tall and dark and look at the world like Mr. Sidney Poitier, something my poor, disturbed and now deceased mother could not have known when I was born, when she named me not Sidney Poitier. I was born after 2 years of hysterical gestation, and who knows what happens in a mind expectant, anticipative for so long. 2 years, at least, this was a story told to me. To make a long and sad story abbreviated and sad, this is how I have put it together. My mother, famously eager to have a child, and likewise famously odd, offbeat, curious to all who met her, and famously very much without a partner, one day told her neighbors, near and not so near, that she was pregnant. Everyone nodded in appropriate and understandably sympathetic, if not outright patronizing in no benign ways. But then, much to their surprise, horror to some, befuddlement to nearly all, my mother's belly began to inflate. Her belly grew quite large from all reports, but after the customary 9 or so months, there was no baby. This full and soon-to-be overfull, too full term had been preceded by 2 hysterical miscarriages, both matters of public knowledge and joking, and so there was already plenty of room for doubt. And then, after 10, 11, 12 months, there was still only brown belly skin stretched drum-taut over what many believed to be a volleyball. And so everyone understood that my crazy mother, volleyball theory notwithstanding, was suffering or perhaps perpetrating yet another hysterical or more likely or precisely insane pregnancy. Then after 24 months, I was in fact born, and not terribly quietly, mind you, as my mother woke many people with this emergency, at first by knocking, and then by howling like a coyote. And so my entry was well attended and well documented by a shocked few who told us shocked, though mainly uncaring many. It was also, as one might expect, a bit of a hysterical delivery. My mother's wailing caught the attention of a nearby woman who called another neighbor woman, and soon there were 3 of them, huddled like conspirators around the spread eagle legs of my mother, staring at her privates and believing that nothing would be forthcoming. One of them had a notion to summon the doctor from down the street, and so she did. The short, waddling doctor, bleary-eyed and out of sorts, arrived and asked a reasonable enough question, "What week are you in?" 104, this came from the first woman. The claim was backed by all present, including my mother, though her exact words were far too many. She then wailed, "Stand back, girls. 2 years he's been forming, and now he's coming." The doctor, though he thought in his Thunderbird blues haze that all of them were crazy, while the huddle of neighbors believed that only my mother was crazy. Then the doctor pulled out his stethoscope, gave the belly a long listen, and standing back, he said, "This woman is going to have a baby." Another wail from my mother. I'd say immediately, "Would you like me to boil water?" one of the women asked. "If you'd like," the doctor said, "tea would be nice." But my coming was not so imminent as my mother might have liked, as the labor proceeded to last for some 40 hours. For 40 hours I saw a parade of curious well-wishers, voyeurs, file through the house, some drinking coffee, some eating popcorn, and all commenting on the very strange gestation period, and even stranger actual existence of the baby. The doctor was quite sad as he'd been called because even though he had taken the Hippocratic oath, he thought that there were better things he could be doing, not the least of which was finishing the bottle he'd abandoned. though the neighborhood women finally used the kitchen to prepare much food that he found he was liking. As it happened, I finally burst out, though perhaps burst is not quite the right word, as I came along feet first and oversized head last, all 10 pounds of me, nearly tearing my mother apart. All of this very slowly. Her screams filled the streets like screams. The birth astonished everyone in the community, perhaps no one more so than my mother, who viewed me as nothing less than an immaculate conception. Even news crews from as far away as San Diego and a couple of university sociologists and biologists came to sneak a peek. The best I can figure is that my mother was in fact hysterically pregnant, and that in month 14 or so of that pregnancy, she somehow managed to find and utilize the sexual organs of my father, a term of course I use here in the strictest zoological sense, who may or may not have been Mr. Sidney Poitier, and she actually did become pregnant, and so here I am. 24 months in the womb was the local legend, and so as a type I was seldom called by my odd name, not Sidney, but instead I was tagged Elephant Boy, on occasion Late Nate, and once Ready Freddy by a boy who had moved to Los Angeles from Ohio, and I never did understand that. As described, my birth was a difficult one, to say the least, sheer hell, to say the most, a scary thing certainly, a near-death experience for my mother and a near-life one for me. She became obsessed with the belief that her pregnancy need not have ended so painfully, and that belief led to a campaign that she took very seriously, a campaign against all vaginal births. Our house was perpetually cluttered with t-shirts and posters with the same image and slogan, a vagina in a circle with a line through it, and MISCS, which stood for Mothers in Support of Cesarean Sections. Though my mother, her name was Portia Poitier, was absolutely, unquestionably, certifiably crazy, she was not without resources. Perhaps she was simply lucky, I will never know, and therefore neither will you. When I was 2, in 1970, she invested every dime she had in a little-known company called Turner Communications Group that would later become Turner Broadcasting System. Every dime she had came to about $30,000, most of the settlement from an elevator accident at her job with the phone company. A lot of money at that time. For someone in our neighborhood, it was a fortune. It turned out to be enough to make her filthy, obscenely, uncomfortably rich. Not as filthy rich as she would have been had she lived a little longer. Instead, I became filthy and insanely rich. In fact, so much stock did she have that Ted Turner actually paid her a visit shortly before her death. I was 7, and I remember the manic white man exploding into our house like a pale mustachioed talking tornado. "Hello there, young fellow," he said to me with his fast Southern accent, engaging and alarming at once. "You seem like a nice young man." I was standing on the porch of our house when he arrived, and a couple of guys had just ridden by on their bikes calling out, "Hey, where's your trunk, Elephant Boy?" My mother, who had spoken to Turner numerous times on the telephone, called him Teddy. The neighbors stared at us from their yards and through their windows. My mother, not out of any distrust, but out of disposition, had kept her wealth guarded, not spending more than would seem ordinary. What she did spend her money on was hardly acceptable to those outside our home: books, music, and language lessons for me, and really good, sensible, and therefore ugly shoes. She would spend hundreds of dollars on a pair of shoes that no one expects to cost more than $30. My white and blue Oxford shirts came from London, south of the road, and she told me, though I had no idea why that mattered. All I knew was that I hated the shirts that no one else wore, longing every day for a t-shirt or a jersey of some kind. Turner clicked his tongue against his impossibly white teeth and surveyed the neighborhood. He seemed comfortable in his skin, and that made me comfortable with him. "Your mom is quite a businesswoman." "Yes, sir, Bobby, quite a business mind." I kicked a couple of toys away from the center of the floor. "Is that Lego you're playing with?" "I love Lego. Didn't have Lego when I was a boy. Never had it," the director said. "You've probably never seen one. Used to cut my poor fingers to Kingdom Come. Blood all over the little screws and bolts. Always loved building things." "Are those brownies I smell? Don't tell me your mama can make brownies too. Don't you just love them when they're hot out of the oven, all warm and gooey and smelling the high heaven? Chocolate all over those little screws and bolts. Yep, some businesswoman, your mother." That's what he was like, and I have to say I liked him. And he genuinely liked my mother, and I loved the fact that she had had such faith, and he loved the fact that she had had such faith in his business. And she liked him, called him Teddy, as I said. When he asked why kids called me Elephant Boy, she told him that they were just jealous. He chewed his brownie and stared at me. Her answer seemed satisfying. "Tell me, Portia, what kind of a name is Nault?" She he asked. It's not Sydney, my mother corrected me. Turner was puzzled momentarily, then nodded his big head and laughed. Oh, I get it. Then it was my mother's turn to look puzzled. I never knew the story because I never knew the story of my name. One might have thought that my mother imagined that our last name, rare as it was enough to cause confusion with Sidney Poitier, the actor, and so I was to be not Sidney Poitier. But her puzzled expression led me to believe that my name had nothing to do with the actor at all, that not Sidney was simply a name she had created with no consideration of the outside world. She liked it, and that was enough. My mother died shortly after that visit from Ted Turner. An illness came over her, that was how it was put to me. An illness has come over your mother. Well, within weeks, death had come over her as well. She passed away in her sleep, and I was told that was a good thing. No suffering, no pain. Even then, I wondered why that was a good thing. We had no family, and certainly no one in the neighborhood would take in the abject spawn of a crazy lady who was the product of such a strange and probably demonic prolonged gestation. Had they known I was worth millions of dollars, a loving boy might have been slightly more attractive. But they didn't know, and they wouldn't have believed it if anyone, even Ted Turner, had told them, even if they had known who Ted Turner was. Enter Ted Turner again. Turner saw my mother's substantial investment in his dream as a kind of symbol and charm for his success. My mother was the kind of grassroots, if not proletarian person he wanted to imagine his media world touching, however tangentially, on his way to great and obscene wealth. Anyway, Turner showed up to the drop-jawed bewilderment of the neighborhood and city and took me away to live with him in Atlanta. To say that I lived with or was raised by Turner is misleading and simply or complexly untrue. I lived at one of his houses and was left pretty much to my own unformed devices. The staff of my house, my part of the household, mostly black women, prepared my meals and took care of my needs, and my teachers, mostly black women, came to the house to educate me. I hardly ever saw Turner or his family, though for a while during puberty I found a place to secretly watch his leotarded wife, Jane Fonda, perform her disco exercises by the pool. Her ribs jutted from beneath her spandex, and I felt more than a little lust, though I held no crutch. To Turner's credit, even he was not comfortable with the scenario of the rich, be-good white man taking in the poor little black child. Television was polluted with that model, and it didn't take a genius to understand that something was wrong with him. My situation was somewhat different, as I was, in fact, extremely wealthy, as a result of my mother's business acumen. I was supposedly free to make decisions concerning my own life. The house staff was run by a statuesque woman from St. Lucia, Claudia, with her massive afro and keen stare, and she made it clear to me on more than one occasion that she had decided, though sweet. And I will skip to the next section here. One sunny day, Turner and I were sitting in the garden between our parts of the mansion, and he was rattling off figures and theories about television, not caring whether I understood or not. In fact, I enjoyed our one-sided chats and viewed them as important and essential to my education. Now it's true that we don't have significant market share at the moment, he said, but good old country persistence will win out. It does every time. This is a simple war of attrition. And if we resolutely stick to our course, we'll gain a foothold, and well, that will be that. But you can't show the news and the Three Stooges all the time, he said. He looked at me. And oh, hell, son, who can afford to make brand new crappy shows? And who wants to? Especially with so many crappy shows just sitting around in cans waiting to be aired again. I'll let the networks waste their time making the new trash. I'll take their stale, old, crappy shows and air them again and again until they sit in people's heads like jingles. Jingles? I need a new pair of Legions. And I want to apologize again about this abstruse arrangement. Boy, that's a lot of A's in one sentence. I know, I must seem strange to you. Hell, it's strange to me, the situation of ours. I'm okay with it. You never see that kidney-sick little boy who can't grow on that different stroke show, you know. Well, I think that's just obscene. Not him, but that picture, that model, the black child being raised by some great white father. I'm not that arrogant. You think I'm arrogant like that? No. I just looked at him. Maybe I am, a little bit, arrogant. I mean, Lord, I can't help it, I'm an American. So am I said. Well said, son, society. Some like to call it the culture these days shouldn't be subjected to that kind of pernicious and deleterious rubbish. And Arnold and Webster model, that's why I'm going to take over television and air that trash several times a day, every day, instead of once a week. That way, we'll all become desensitized to its harmful and consumptive effects of sheer overexposure. That's what I mean by jingles. They'll become meaningless and innocuous little ditties. He popped a stick of gum into his mouth and offered me one. It's cinnamon. Have you ever been sailing? No, of course you haven't. I love sailing. The bright sun in your face, the sea smell, the breeze running through your hair. You looked at me. My hair anyway. Yep. I'm going to take you sailing. It's a shame about that sick dwarfish boy with the bum kidneys, never growing old and all that. I asked if Jane would be coming along with us on the sailing trip. I had an image of her deck lounging in a bikini, stuck deck lounging in my brain. I don't know, he said. She's mad at me a lot these days. I think I talk too much for her. I'm not the silent cowboy type like her daddy. Don't you just hate raisins? They're too sweet, if you ask me, and they look like flies. Don't you think? Flies without wings, and they're too sweet. Weekly, I would be driven into town by Claudia as her big hair filled the space behind the wheel of the Volvo station wagon that I had purchased with my money. In town, I was allowed to ride my bicycle while she did the shopping. I was always receiving beatings from boys with whom I sought to play, and it always started the same way. What's your name? The kid would ask. Not Sydney, I would say. Okay, then what is it? I told you it's not Sydney. No. The boy would make a face and stare at his friends and say, what's wrong with you? And I would say, I always thought in a polite and non-threatening way, nothing's wrong with me. My name is not Sydney. This would be about the time that the first punch found the side of my head. Then they would understandably and justifiably frustrated and angry with me, though I thought I was being, if not petulant, they thought I was being, if not petulant, then wearisome. But I saw myself as merely answering the question honestly. As I mentioned, I had a martial arts instructor. Claudia hired him after my third thrashing. He was a stocky Korean man named Raymond, a name I found disappointing. And he came by the mansion every Thursday. This was unfortunate because my trips to town were on Wednesdays. Though he was able to observe the damage and debrief me on the tactics used against me, all of his instruction was lost in the air during the following 6 days, so that by the next Wednesday I was facing either a brand new attacker or an old one with new tricks. Okay, now Sydney, now show me what the bully did, Raymond said to me. We were standing on the lawn near the pool in our bright white dojis. He was with his black belt and I with my white. How did he come at you? Well, he was bigger than me, I told him. And he grabbed me around my neck and he punched me in the top of my head with what felt like iron knuckles. And then, while I was holding my head and trying to find my balance, he punched me viciously twice in the shoulder, and I think I had nerve damage. That's simple to fix, he said, reassuringly. I thought he was referring to the aforementioned nerve damage, but I remembered that he always said that, and after he said it, I was either hurt or humiliated. Grab me just the way he grabbed you. Raymond leaned over and allowed me to place him in a headlock. I didn't like that position, A, because of the anticipation of whatever demonstration of defensive measure was coming, and B, because his hair stank of cigarettes, some kind of coconut perfume substance, possibly shampoo, but unlikely, and God knew what else. So what you do is you reach over his head and you put your index and middle fingers into his nostrils like so, and yank, and the bastard's head will snap back thusly. He did so thusly, which was synonymous with roughly or violently, and as he always did thusly, he threw me onto the mat with a hollow and sick thud, and sadly familiar thud. I, of course, landed on my already bruised and nerve-damaged shoulder. Simple, right? Do you get it? Simple, I said. Now you try it, he said. Raymond put me in a snug and what I found to be meaningful headlock and said, go. But I could not reach over his shoulder and certainly not around his misshapen, oversized, and smelly head, come even close to his red and bulbous nose, with nostrils ample enough to accommodate a few fingers if I had only been able to get there. I can't reach, I said. Keep trying, he said. And he gave my head a little squeeze and a little twist that incidentally must have affected my spine because my shoulder pain lessened. Close your eyes and visualize your actions, your movements, picture everything, imagine you were me. I shuddered at the very thought. Still, I couldn't reach his nose, and now I was finding it extremely difficult to breathe. I tried to say as much though I'm sure it sounded much more like gurgling to him, and then he let me go by tossing me to the mat, rather thusly. We'll have to come up with another strategy altogether. He paced. This is the thing. You can't let him get you in the head like the first place. Yeah, that's the thing. He studied me for a long, scary second, as if to figure out what part of me might make the most noise upon breaking. Okay, come at me as if you want to put me in a headlock. I did, but it must have looked incredibly silly, since he was at least a foot taller than me. As instructed, I went at him, like the complete fool I was, and he stopped me in the left instep with one of his turned-in, monkey-looking feet, put the same foot behind my right ankle, and popped me in the chest with a meaty heel of his hand, sending me sprawling onto the mat. I lay there, and as he stood over me, he put his fist in his palm and bowed. Our time is up today, not Sydney. I'll see you next week. Thank you. 5 goes on, they do things, they go sailing, so she goes to high school. Not Sydney. Like most people, I am smarter than some, dumber than others, skinnier than most, fatter than a few, but none was ever more confused than I was. I flew with confusion always parallel to me, with a whole internal chase at my rear. The one matter that was not confusing to me, but seemed to escape all others, was the fact that the only thing that was certain to become obsolete would necessarily become very worn was the truth. I knew this in spite of the truth, that I had little truck with the truth in my life. It was not that I considered myself a resident in a den of lies, but rather that my history was shrouded and diced and soaking wet with hysteria and contradiction. Contradictions or no, my trajectory through life, though different from most, was nonetheless a trajectory. The move from my bizarre early childhood in Los Angeles to my strange latter childhood in Atlanta was abrupt, yet somehow seemingly seamless. The sudden death of my mother and my induction into the world of a media icon notwithstanding. A few years disappeared into wherever time goes, and with them my childhood. Claudia, the cook and my karate instructor. Betty graduated from college and married a Morehouse man and moved to Ohio. For a couple of years, I received the occasional uninformative postcard from Akron, usually depicting something called a soapbox derby. I lived in my part of the house pretty much alone, as a Russian woman who cooked for me spoke no English, and the woman who cleaned refused to speak to me at all. I saw Ted often. By the time I was in high school, it was common knowledge, or at least it was no secret, that I lived at Ted Turner's house. To my teachers, my name was odd. To my classmates, I was Sydney or not Sydney or something other than Sydney. My real name became a mystery to be solved for many. Still, I was beaten often, but now an attempt to have me give up that bit of prized information, namely my name. There was some upside, as some of the looser girls would offer to kiss me if I told them my name. I would gladly agree to the arrangement, then I would receive the kiss and then say, my name is not Sydney. Unfortunately, the looser girls often could be more violent than the boys, and so they would offer up an entree of whoop-ass besides hair pulling and scratching. A steady diet of humiliation leads to a kind of immunity, a desensitization to abasement, discomfiture. And so I found myself caring less and less, and the less I cared, the less anyone seemed interested in beating me up. Lack of interest or not, the beatings continued, perhaps because they had become a habit or ritual for a few. Sadly, that journey to pointless and profitless immunity often is completed with a degree of permanent injury, usually to the brain and or nervous system, but I luckily made it through without any perceptible lasting marks, physical, physiological, and neurological. Psychic damage, however, is far more difficult to assess, though I think that I was saved from that even by my sense of irony. My mother's insistence on my reading as much as possible made me bored in school. I never imagined that I was terribly bright, but I turned out to be extremely well educated. I made friends with a squat, square-headed, and bespectacled boy named Eddie Eleazar in my American history class. He had an overdeveloped fondness for World War II era airplanes and suffered all the ridicule and only a fraction of the beatings I endured. I imagine that his diminutive stature saved him from physical abuse. We shared a crush on and competed for the attention of our history teacher, Miss Hancock. A narrow-shouldered blonde woman with pale blue eyes and long legs, who was not so much beautiful as perhaps honest-looking. Eddie attempted to wow her with his plastic models of Messerschmitts and Zeros and Corsairs, while I became obsessed with the concealment of FDR's disability from the American public. My real interest being the definitions of disability in public. About this interest, Miss Hancock would say, "How fascinating," a response that I loved then, but later would recognize as code for any number of things. There were clearly codes in her employ that fell short of my understanding, but it soon became evident that my emerging resemblance to Sidney Poitier was not lost on her, and that an inappropriate and, I must say, welcome relationship began to surface. The girls at my school were too accustomed to teasing, ignoring, or beating me to observe any maturation or change in my appearance or bearing. But Miss Hancock, unfortunate name and all, did notice with much zeal, eagerness, and a surprising amount of enterprise. The relationship took flight unlike any of Eddie's Messerschmitts one day after school when Miss Hancock asked me if I would accompany her home and move some bags of topsoil and manure from the trunk of her car to the garden shed. I should have read the signals as she told me this while crossing and uncrossing and recrossing her smooth mini-skirted legs and applying dark red lipstick, but I was naive, dumb, inexperienced, 15, and most importantly, stupid. So I rode with her in her powder blue Mustang convertible, top and tinted windows up, to her modest house at the edge of Decatur. I got out of the car and walked to the back, waiting for her to open the trunk, which she did, and all I saw was a spare tire, a jack, and a jar of petroleum jelly. I looked at her and imagined rather blankly. She responded by saying, "Do you know what fellatio is?" I told her I did not, but the subtext was becoming clear. I had heard other guys talking about encounters, desired encounters of this kind, but I thought this was all being wasted on me. I was a sexual imbecile. More than that, I was an innocent, a stowaway. I had come to her country with no visa, passport, and no destinations in mind. I had come to move topsoil in the trunk of a blue Mustang to some garden shed in our backyard. In her house, and I'm not certain how she got me in there, the teacher put her mouth on my penis and sucked on it. My eyes rolled back into my head, and I recalled the long, drawn-out, luxurious days of my youth. I was lying in the backyard staring at the forever cloudless blue California sky, except that it was brown. I could hear my mother in her study by the open window, dictating into her recorder her ideas about politics and culture. I was alone, as I was always alone. No one would play with me but free, but somehow I loved the moments in the backyard, my mother's ranting a kind of white noise in the house, and the sounds of boys playing elsewhere or comfort because that meant they had no interest in torturing me. I lay there and identified the birds, my trusty Peterson guide beside me. I was enjoying the memory of the rufous-sided toady when sharp pain brought me back. I did have some idea what fellatio was, but I had not known the extent to which teeth were involved. I was contemplating this while sitting in the garden at home. Ted joined me. When I was a boy, I always wanted to collect me a jar of them fireflies, but I never did, he said. Have you ever been seduced, I asked. Once or twice, he chuckled, when I was younger. What about you? Why are you sitting like that? Do you know what fellatio is, I asked him. Why, yes, John, I do. That's when one person wraps his or her lips around the penis of another and either sucks it or rubs it with the tongue, sometimes causing ejaculation. It's also referred to as giving head on or a blowjob, though blow seems antithetical to the actual action employed. Why do you ask? Someone did it to me, I said. Who? My history teacher. A woman? Yes, a woman. An attractive woman? I guess. Well, you know, that doesn't sound so bad on the face of it, but it does sound a little inappropriate. Ted folded a stick of gum into his mouth. Gum? It's juicy fruit. When I shook my head, he looked back at my part of the house. Do you ever get lonely living back here all by yourself? Not really. These are Italian shoes, he said. I've often wondered why those Italians should be good at making shoes. They don't walk more than other people. When I was a boy, I read this story about a man who lost his arm in an accident. It scared me so much I taught myself to tie my shoes with my hand. But wait, Ted, how do you get to choose which arm you lose in an accident? I asked. Ted stopped working his gum for a second. That's a very good question, Art. I hadn't thought of that. I guess it better be my left. So what are you going to do? What are you going to do? Are you going to turn this teacher in? Do what? Report your teacher for making improper advances to you. A minor. Do you like it? Did you like it? Not terribly, I said. It did feel kind of good for the writing. Well, it's up to you, but I say report her. She's contributing to the delinquents of a minor and apparently didn't effective blowjob. I don't think I'll tell on her, he said. She seems kind of sad. Everybody's always maligning the granny knot, but I think it's every bit as good as a square knot. Left over right, right over left, who the hell cares? What do you think? What are you talking about, I asked him. You know, I miss that Betty. He looked at the peonies near where we sat. She was a smart young woman. Well, she's in Ohio with some minister dude with dreadlocks. She sends me postcards. Minister dude, God save us. Are you going back to the history teacher's house? Ted asked. I don't know. I don't think so. I wouldn't recommend it, he said. Is that fatherly advice? I didn't mean it to sound snide anyway, but I could imagine him hearing it like that, but he didn't. No, this is advice from a fellow penis owner, he said. These things don't come with a manual. As far as I can see, nothing of any steps come with a manual. And so that's why we have television. Ted looked at me blankly for a second and then said, I guess so, Nod. I guess that's right. Everybody should have a headstone, you know. You know what I want written on my headstone when I die? I wanted to read, I have nothing more to say. I nodded. What does my mother's headstone say? I don't know, son. I never actually saw her grave. I learned of her death because I was named executor of her will. I suppose her stone gives her the dates of her birth and death, and maybe says something like, loving mother. I think that's kind of standard. I didn't say it to Ted, but I wanted to see my mother's grave. I wanted to come up with something fitting for her headstone. I remember your mother's cookies. Damn, they were good. I thought about the cookies and didn't remember them being so tasty. However, they were remarkably uniform in size and color. This teacher, does she have full lips? Does she wear makeup? How short are her skirts? Just trying to get a picture of this whole thing. And I think I'll stop there. Thank you. I've been asked to respond to questions.
Anyone have any questions?
There's a guy back there, but I don't know if he's on mine, so I don't know.
If you have a question, we have 3 microphones up here, so you can go ahead and just wait the microphone.
Sure.
I wanted to ask why you incorporated your own self into the novel.
Okay, later on, I was making fun of everybody else, so I figured I'd make fun of myself as well. Turned out it was really easy to do.
Yeah, we had kind of like a debate in my class about why you may have incorporated yourself into the novel, so I just wanted.
Yeah, I just had fun.
Any recommendations for aspiring writers?
Yeah, marry money. I'm dead serious. I haven't done that, so you read. You just read, really, that's the most important thing to learn how to do. It's just reading it and understanding how the art works.
Okay, thanks.
I have a question. This is Professor Stewart of the English department here. It's pretty succinct, but I was curious about some of your references are kind of oblique, and some of them are pretty or kind of obvious. That's kind of the fun to read the novel. But I was curious about the letters of the fraternity that Knott was going to join. Was it Omega Psi Phi? Was that a Naughty by Nature reference?
You know,
I don't know what I'm talking about, but you know what OPP is, what the letters seem to be.
Well, I suffer from what me in my house I call work amnesia. I forget the books almost immediately after I write them. I'm serious. So often when I'm reading these things, I think, wow, I don't remember that at all. So I'm struggling to remember, I sort of remember it, but I don't remember the history of my choosing. I was probably, I'm sure I was making fun I went to a couple of step shows years ago. I became fascinated with step shows, and so I would go to.
You certainly would have heard it there, I'm sure.
Yeah, but it was just, you made it seem sort of funny to me, so that's what.
It came up in our class.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, and so we were just curious. And one of the questions that was up here, why Ted Turner?
The media. I was using that media. It's Steve Jobs would have been as funny, and it just made sense. Also, I kind of like anybody who gives $1 billion to the UN to pay this country's dues. It's okay. And I met him years ago in passing, but I do not know Ted Turner at all. But people who know him say that this is all accidental, that I actually did sort of nail him. It's kind of frightening. It's also frightening because I'm not so dissimilar to this guy as you can be. When I get fun of myself, it sounds really too much like that.
Can you talk a little bit about, are you working on anything right now? Can you tell us a little bit about it? Your writing process, how do you get the writing done? Writer's block, because we have many aspiring writers in the audience.
Well, I just finished a novel about 3 days ago, or maybe a week ago now. And what happens after I finish a novel, I become terribly depressed. And so I'm searching for something to work on. I teach in a PhD program for writers, and I don't believe in writer's block. When they come in and say, I have writer's block, I say, well, let's fix that. If you don't bring me 20 pages by Friday, you fail. I get 20 pages on Friday. Now, they may not be a great 20 pages, but they're 20 pages that we can work on. You can't work on nothing. And as far as how one works, I'm a bad example of how to structure my writing, but my life as a novelist also. And we have completely different work habits. Sort of seem to be more reasonable and understandable than mine. She needs 4 hours in the morning to work. And I don't know when I stay up all night about it. If somebody says, let's go play tennis or go to a movie, I go to a movie. I have to know what's going on. I have young children, and so when they want to play, I play. I'm very lucky in that way, but somehow work happens. So I'm a bad example. I don't worry about it. Maybe that's why I didn't write a few books. I don't feel stressed about stuff. As much as I love literature, and as much as I depend on these books for my livelihood, my attitude when I go to work is, it's just books. It's not a hospital. Nobody's going to die. But I take it seriously, and that's the best advice I can give to any writers. If you don't take yourself seriously, no one will. Yeah.
What is the difference for you between the rough draft of your work and your finished edited material? Where do you find that point?
Well, I don't want to burn the finished material. That's the part of it. Yeah, but the first draft, I can easily turn around and set it afire. Because it's so far from what I want. I tell my students, and I tell myself, you write something all the way to the end of it. When you start something, you don't know what the hell you're doing. By the time you get to the middle, you have some idea. By the time you get to the end, you you know what it is. Then you have to go back and fix the beginning because you now know what you're doing, which necessarily makes changes in the middle happen, and the end will change again. Now you have the first draft. Now it's time to sit back, look at it, and decide whether it's something you want to read. As I've been doing this for 30 years, so I've gotten a little more efficient at it, but I used to write many drafts. I write fewer now, mainly because I'm more comfortable with it, and I don't have the kids, I don't have the time. But with my graduate students, I have a student who's done very well. Yeah, maybe you're familiar with his work. His name is Chris Amani. He wrote a novel called Graceland. And that novel he wrote me 8 times. And it turned out to do very well for him. But he was a poet. This is the other thing is we fall in love with our language. And this is the thing that one has to learn as a fiction writer is it's not about us. It's about the story. So, as a poet, he would start writing like a poet. And I would ask him to read aloud in my office. And I'd walk behind him. And now, today we have to be very gentle with our students, but I've been around for a long time. And when he would get to the really poetic part, I'd slap him on the top of the head. And I'd say, read that again. And he would nod and he'd get it. And it became known as the self-slap, where I would sit at my desk, he would read, and he'd come to those parts, and he'd reach back and hit himself. That was the only thing I ever gave Chris. Everything else was his work, his doing it over and over again, and taking himself seriously. I'm very proud of him, but I did one little thing for him. That's the thing about teachers. They'll do one little thing for you, and the rest of it it's all up to you. You look just like the other guy that was
in your book, your character teaches something called the philosophy of nonsense, I think?
Yes.
Any chance you could give us a small philosophy of nonsense lesson right now?
Well, and I can say why nonsense interests me. I actually have taught this course, and it's not an unusual course. There's a lot of work on nonsense. Nonsense works because it looks like it makes sense. I don't know if you ever have read Lewis Carroll's poetry. And you read this stuff, and it makes no sense at all, but the rhythm of it, the structure makes it sound like it should make sense, and that fascinates me. So I want to make not something that looks like it makes, that sounds normal, it doesn't make sense. What I'd like to think is that I can create fiction that reads as if it's not nonsense, but in fact is.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Thank you very much. I've always been interested in nonsense, being a talking mime.
Yeah.
Hi. One of the things that interests me about your work in general is that you have targeted an aspect of the media that I find fascinating, which is the publishing industry and how decisions are made, and also academia as an academic. Why do you find those to be interesting topics to dramatize in your work?
Well, one reason is I'm familiar with them. I've been in publishing world for, God, almost 30 years. And I've been in academia about it as well. And they're fun places, and rife with all sorts of, like any sector of our culture. And so I know them, and so it's easy for me to make fun of them. But the thing about, I think, strong satire is it requires not only knowledge of the thing you're satirizing, but also an affection for it. For example, I write a lot about theory. consume a lot of critical theory nonsense. But I don't mean that in a bad way. It's a lot of fun. And so when I teach a theory course, and what I teach my students to do is to make fun of theory. So they'll write a passage, take Derrida and rewrite it and try to make fun. Of course, Derrida's already making fun of Derrida. But my belief is, in order to do that, one has to understand it. So, let's look at that. But I do it because I actually enjoy theory. I enjoy being an academic. I get paid to hang out with smart young people and work with people whose job it is to think about something. Even though, as you all know, when you put all those people into one room, they become a giant baby.
Hi there and welcome. I'd like to ask if any of your books have been optioned for movies, or are there any discussions under the way? And the obvious one of my students asked, has Sidney Poitier, to your knowledge, did he ever read your novel? And did you ever meet him perchance?
I have not met Sidney Poitier, and ironically, he's not a character in the novel, but I did send him a copy because his name is here. I also sent a copy to Trent. But my favorite Ted Turner story, though, is I guess I did know him. He was at Denver College. Apparently, he was a friend of the provost, and so he was invited, much to the consternation of the faculty. They did not want Ted Turner. They viewed him as a capitalist, terrible person. But he got up and he stood in front of the graduation. He looked at his friend and said, "I've never seen my friend John so happy. I think I'll go out and buy myself a little college." So he did not ingratiate himself. No, I haven't heard anything. I haven't heard anything back. Oh, the option. Oh, many things have been optioned. One was made, maybe the worst movie ever made. So far afield from my novel, they did not have bought it. And the film business is so weird. I won't have anything to do with them. I had an experience early on. My first novel was optioned by Norman Lear. It's a novel about a baseball player. It's about a baseball player who deals with some of the things that you would find sort of reasonably consistent in fiction by African American writers. Alienation, cultural alienation, search for familial integrity, a search for freedom. And the first question they asked me in this meeting about, after they had optioned it, I had been given the screenplay contract, which was kind of unusual, but I accepted it, was, can we make the main character white? And I thought, well, you have to make everybody else in the movie black, sure. It'd be kind of a negative image, that would work for me, that would be kind of ironic. And so, don't worry about it. Then they asked for other changes that I couldn't imagine. Then they asked for the insertion of a major, this is in 1983. And they asked for an insertion of a major white character because they did not believe that a black man could carry a film alone. Then they asked for the removal of an elephant that was kind of crucial to the story. Then they asked for the removal of the activity of flying, which was the crux of the story. And finally I said, why did you buy this? You could have made what you want to make, and I would never have noticed. And finally, at the end of the meeting, I said to Lear, I'm a very calm person, I don't get upset. And I looked at Norman and I said, you know, if I see you after this meeting, I might have to try to hurt you. And I never saw Norman again. 15 years later, maybe more than 15, I think 15. Norman Lear was giving a talk on my campus. It was on a flyer, and And in my mailbox, there was a note on the flyer that said, hope you can attend, no, and no hard feelings, normal. He hadn't forgotten for 15 years. Strange folks.
Two questions. The first is, Sidney leaves in search of his mom's grave. What is he really looking for? What do you think he really was on a journey for? And then the second question is, my favorite scene is the Bill Cosby speech. Can you tell us a little bit more about what went into sort of recreating that speech for the now?
Well, I won't tell you what Not Sidney's looking for, particularly because one, I never say what the novel's about, and two, I don't know. And the second part of the question was, the Bill Cosby speech. Well, I'm not a big fan of Bill Cosby, as you probably get from the speech. Now I guess a lot of people aren't a fan of it. I didn't know about him yet, that stuff. But it was all the stuff, his posturing and being so condescending to young black men. Right? I didn't know. He's not too far in age from me, but I did too. It makes sense to me. And so in the novel, there's a speech that parodies him and actually, I think, makes some technical fun.
Back to this conversation about the way that the novel explores issues of race, and that I was curious about, and we talked about this a lot in my classes, about the way that you see racial profiling explored throughout the storyline, and then when Not Sidney runs into, what's the name of the town, the great name of that town he runs into?
Oh, Smut Eye?
Yeah, Smut, yeah.
There's actually
Is there? I should have known. And then, of course, then Professor Everett also shows up, and he's kind of throwing in the locker for a little while. But particularly at the ending, I know this is taboo because I think I'm kind of asking you what I shouldn't ask you, which is maybe the meaning of the ending of the novel. When he finally shows up, and he arrives in Hollywood, and they'll mistake him for Not Sidney, and it's almost as if it doesn't matter that that they think he's Sidney. It doesn't matter that they think he's Sidney. He becomes Sidney, is what I'm trying to say. Regardless of the fact that he's not Sidney, he becomes Sidney through the eyes of Hollywood. And that reminds me of what you were just saying about when your works were going to turn into a movie, and I wanted to be played by a white character. It's kind of interesting. So it kind of fits that theme too. So I wonder if you have any comments on that subject of the novel.
No. The stuff about about Hollywood, I never thought about it, but I think I'm sure that stuff's just so embedded in my thinking about Hollywood that it's probably there. Trying to find something interesting to say about Susan Wine.
Okay. Hello, everyone. So we can take one more question, and after which Everett will be going over there to 15-minute book signing. So this is our last question.
Okay, me again. Why doesn't he just reword his introduction?
I'm sorry.
Like, Not Sidney is my name. Why doesn't he ever do something like that?
Because that wouldn't be interesting in the novel.
Okay. So there's no real character reason, or just a reasons of the plot?
Sure.
Okay.
Well, let's give a big round of applause.